This is CGTN, China Global Television Network.
"13 people in custody over deadly blast in Sri Lanka." Sudan's Transitional Military Council is considering the formation of a joint military-civilian ruling council. And in China, preparations continue to mark the 70th anniversary of the founding of the People's Liberation Army Navy. Hello and welcome to Africa Live. As always, great to have you with us. I'm Richard Nta live in Nairobi. For those of you joining us across the continent and around the globe, we thank you for joining us. Let's take a look at other stories making headlines this hour. Questions around whether Jumia is an African startup arise after its listing on the New York Stock Exchange. The glitz and glamour at the Cape Town Fashion Week as African designers showcase their talent. We start in Sri Lanka, where the government has ordered a new nighttime curfew in the capital, Colombo. The measures come after a series of deadly bombings hit the South Asian island nation on Easter Sunday. Authorities say the curfew will run from 8 p.m. local time on Monday and run through Tuesday, 4 a.m. The coordinated explosions are through churches and luxury hotels. 290 people have been killed and hundreds others wounded. Police say 24 people have now been detained in relation to the attacks, but have not provided any details on their identity. Security forces are carrying out a nationwide investigation with international assistance. No group has yet claimed responsibility. CGTN's Jin Ying Chiao has more.
8 devastating bomb blasts, ripping through churches holding Easter services and high-end hotels in Sri Lanka. Some of them, officials said, were suicide bombs. "I heard the explosion and then the roof fell on us," he says. "We took the children and ran out from the rear door. But when I came to the hospital, I saw my brother-in-law and son on the ground," he says. The first 6 went off at different locations within half an hour of each other. 3 churches were hit in the cities of Negombo, Batticaloa, and Colombo, as well as 3 hotels, the Shangri-La, Kingsbury, and Cinnamon Grand Hotels, all in Colombo. As panic and chaos ensued across the country, the other 2 blasts were detonated. One was near a zoo, the other at a house during a security raid, both in Colombo. The government declared a curfew in the capital city, Colombo, and blocked access to social media and messaging sites.
So it's a very, very sad day for all of us.
Police say 35 foreigners are among the dead, including British, Dutch, Portuguese, Chinese, and American citizens. Many are yet to be identified. There have been no claims of responsibility for the attacks yet, but 13 people have already been arrested. French news agency AFP reports that there was an intelligence alert 10 days ago, saying a foreign intelligence agency warned that suicide bombers plan to hit, quote, prominent churches as well as Indian High Commission. The Sri Lankan Prime Minister acknowledged information was there.
While this goes on, we must also look into why adequate precautions were not taken in this respect. But first and foremost, we have to ensure that terrorism does not lift its head in Sri Lanka. We cannot allow that, and we are prepared to take all measures necessary to ensure that terrorism is contained and wiped out in this country.
In the wake of the tragedy, Sri Lankans have flocked to donate blood to help the injured. A witness said there were huge crowds and roads congested as people tried to enter the blood center. Jane Chow, CGTN.
Chinese President Xi Jinping and Premier Li Keqiang and Foreign Minister Wang Yi have all contacted their Sri Lankan counterparts and sent their condolences to the victims of the bomb blast. At a routine briefing in Beijing on Monday, spokesperson Geng Shuang introduced the safety measures being taken by the Chinese Foreign Ministry and the Chinese Embassy in Colombo.
The Chinese Foreign Ministry and the Chinese Embassy in Sri Lanka began emergency response plans as soon as the incident took place. Emphasis is being placed upon checking on Chinese casualties, searching for missing persons, visiting the injured, sending alerts to Chinese personnel and institutions in Sri Lanka, and calling on them to prepare for safety issues. Preliminary verification has indicated that there are Chinese nationals who are either dead or have gone missing. 5 are injured and have been hospitalized. Their lives are at not risk and they are in stable conditions.
Well, here are some quick facts about the blast and the island country. Arrests as death toll nears 300. Horrible story coming out of Colombo there. Multiple attacks kill at least 290 and wound 500. Moving on now onto Sudan, and the Transitional Military Council says it's considering the formation of a military civilian council. The council is one of the requirements put forward by Sudanese protesters demanding reforms. Meanwhile, the country will receive $3 billion worth of aid from Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates. It's a critical lifeline to Sudan's new military leaders who have inherited a deepening economic crisis. The military leaders maintain it is keen to begin the transitional period as soon as possible.
في تكوين مجلس عسكري.
Most of the views presented are in agreement about forming a military council and forming a civilian administration responsible for executive government. Most of the opinions are in agreement about these two options. Some options are suggesting forming a high council or a joint council, but there aren't big differences between most views. It will be easy for people to reach an agreement. By the end of the current week, the committee will present its views and summary on the suggestions presented.
But Sudanese protest leaders seem not to agree with the Transitional Military Council. They claim the military council is reluctant about handing over power to civilians. They now plan to announce their civilian council, saying they no longer recognize the Transitional Military Council. The leaders on Sunday suspended negotiations with the Transitional Council. More protests are expected as part of a widening campaign to push for the transfer of power to civilians. And in Libya, explosions and air raids have shaken the capital Tripoli as rival forces battle for control. The 2-week offensive led by the eastern-based Libya National Army has left more than 225 dead and more than 1,000 wounded. CGTN's Guy Henderson reports from Benghazi.
The UN-backed government in Tripoli and the militias protecting it have launched a counter-offensive against Khalifa Haftar's forces. One of the arguments for the possible timing of that is that the government may feel that it has to make some gains while it can. We took a journey to a military academy earlier in the day, and it was interesting to see what appears to be a real effort to professionalise what was a loose militia into a proper military force with drills, discipline, ranks and proper weapons. So that perhaps goes some way to answering that question, although it can't be guaranteed as to what kind of force exists on the front line and other parts of Libya. The second question, of course, is what Haftar might do with that professionalised force. Will he hand power back and be the guarantor of security for a civilian authority, or could he look to take power himself? And that might well ask questions of stability in Libya, because a lot of people we've spoken to here in the East say that is not what they want. They fought for a revolution, and they want that revolution to continue towards its completion. And worth remembering as well that one of the main reasons for a split between East and West is that there was a feeling that this Eastern force had too many people in it from the Gaddafi era pre-revolution. That is something that to some extent commanders we spoke to today acknowledged it is hardly the recipe for stability. Guy Henderson, CGTN, Benghazi.
In Egypt, the participation of the youth in the constitutional referendum would be seen as a sign of support to the ongoing political process. Voters from older age groups traditionally appear to participate more in the electoral process than the youth. CGTN's Adel Al-Marki with the details. Let's take a look.
The wrinkles on their faces and their gray hair declare the dominant age group in this referendum so far. Egyptian youth have been engaging heavily in politics since the 2011 uprising, yet in recent years they have not been as active.
There is definitely a difference between generations. There is difference in participating in general and in opinion. My children believe they shouldn't participate, but this is passive. I believe that if they don't like the amendments, they should vote no.
People didn't see the fruits of their engagement, especially in the last 8 years. They have went to the electoral box so many times without actual reflection on their life or their life standards or anything, so they don't see it as beneficial.
Saifullah Al-Khawanki was one of the active youth in politics back in 2011, following the January uprising. And like many who voted for the 2014 constitution, he believed in the presidential term limit and the distribution of powers it provided. Saif, though, is among few of his generation who have decided to vote.
I think it's very important to vote in such referendum because we are in the process of state building, and this is a very decisive point in our path. I think 2014 constitution was very good, and protecting 2014 constitution is much more important than changing it because it was not tested. There are still many articles that were not actually implemented. The current changes in this referendum does not reflect the weak parts of the 2014 constitution.
The vote in the Egyptian referendum has once again shed the light over the gap in political opinion between generations, between the young who are still rebellious and the elderly who are trying to convince him to participate proactively even if their opinion appears to be different. Adel Mahroui, CGTN, Cairo.
Let's shift gears a little bit and return to our top story. For more on the update about the situation in Colombo, we are joined from Colombo by CGTN's Ravinder Bawa. Ravinder, thank you for taking time out. Ravinder, first things first, Sri Lanka and indeed the whole world is still in shock after those deadly attacks. What is the latest on the investigations into the bombings?
Well, at the moment, as you have heard, that 290 people have died so far. It has confirmed that, and over 500 people are being treated in hospitals and are injured. We just came back from a family meeting, a family who've lost 4 people, mother, father, and 2 small children. And the whole community was gathered there, were offering prayer. And the funeral will be held on Wednesday. And this is the story in many households around Colombo. And we are just standing outside the National Hospital where there is an accident ward which has been created. Yesterday, of course, there was a chaos here, but today things are much in control. Curfew has been lifted and the government has said that today, again in the night from 8 p.m. to 4 p.m. tomorrow, the curfew will be imposed once again just to ensure that no untoward incidents happen. In the meantime, the Prime Minister, Mr. Ranil Wickremesinghe, addressed a press conference a little while back where he once again made the same claim which he did yesterday, that even though the police had inputs, they did not take the appropriate action at the right time, and this will be investigated. Investigations are on, and around 24 people have been arrested. They are being questioned and to find out more as to who was behind this. So far, no responsibility has been claimed by anybody, and still investigations are on. But this pattern in which it happened, of course, some experts are saying that there has to be an outside hand of ISIS, because it's a similar where suicide bombers were there in all these luxury hotels or churches. Family from whom we came to, they were just standing right next to one of such person, and then this happened at St. Anthony's Church. So that was what the family was telling us. So a situation just getting back to normal as far as Colombo is concerned. After a curfew has picked up, some shops have opened, traffic is back on the roads, but we still are waiting to find out who was behind this and what was the intention. Richard.
All right, Ravinda, thank you for that insight. You have mentioned some measures that the government has taken, like the curfew, of course, but I guess the question that we all would like to know is, what is the government doing or will do to protect and guard against such brazen attacks in the future?
Well, at the moment, I think they are dealing with what has happened, because I think Sri Lanka was not prepared for any such things. It's been 10 years that the civil war was over, and people were living in their comfort zones, and nothing of this kind had been imagined except for a small violence which happened between the Buddhists and the Muslims last year. But apart from that, generally it has been peaceful, and this comes as a shock for the people, and I think government has also been taken aback, despite, if this is true, that the police had input and they did not take appropriate action. That in itself shows that how laid back everybody had become here as far as any kind of an attack was concerned. At the moment, government is they have formed a team under the supervision of a Supreme Court judge. The President has appointed him to investigate the matter. Apart from that, the forces are investigating the matter. So investigations are on, but still no such clues have come forward in terms of providing them a headway into why this happened and who was behind this. So that is still to be found out. But government at the moment, in terms of security, we see in areas like outside schools, outside churches, police is still deployed, and outside churches and all these explosion sites, the whole area has been cordoned off, so nobody can go there. And we saw lots of crowds coming in as if they wanted to see where this has happened, what happened after the curfew was lifted. So in terms of security, that is what we have seen on the roads at the moment. Richard.
All right, Ravinda Bauer, thank you so much for bringing us the insights of this story, and we shall definitely keep in touch with you as we learn more as the investigation unfolds. Time now for a quick break. The news continues on CGTN. Here's a look at what's ahead. In China, preparations continue to mark the 70th anniversary of the founding of the People's Liberation Army Navy. And we take a critical look at the participation of the youth in the voting process in Egypt.
How will your world change today? What happens here? What happens there? Or what you make happen for yourself. If it matters to you, it matters to us too. Your stories are the stories that need to be told. Africa Live. Find your voice. Africa Live. Find your voice.
Welcome back. China and Africa have deepened ties not only in trade and investment, but also in peace and security. Right now, about 100 young African military officials are in China for an official visit. CGTN's Beatrice Marshall tells us more.
Over the past decade, China's role in Africa's peace and security has rapidly grown, with military cooperation and peacekeeping deployment. Through the Forum on China-Africa Cooperation, or FOCAC, and the African Union's support, China has made a growing effort to take a pan-African approach to security on the continent. It is against this background that young African officers are visiting China, a follow-up to the implementation of the 2018 FOCAC Plan of Action, which calls for ongoing forums on peace, security and law enforcement between China and Africa.
Over the past years, we have seen tremendous effort being made by African leaders, as well as various partners, including China, in trying to promote peace as well as development in Africa. So the AU, in collaboration with China through the FOCAC initiative, is making great efforts to prepare for peace and prevent conflict in Africa.
China's contribution to Africa's peace and security has become more prominent with its presence in peacekeeping missions in places like South Sudan, DR Congo, Western Sahara, Liberia, Mali, Cote d'Ivoire, and Darfur. Security cooperation efforts include maritime rescue, anti-piracy, medical and humanitarian support, and peace mediation. At the UN summit in 2015, President Xi Jinping pledged that China would provide $100 million worth of free military assistance to the African Union. This would be given over 5 years to support the establishment of an African standby force and enhance Africa's crisis response capacity.
China is probably the biggest contributor of troops of all the UN security members, and most of those peace officers are deployed in Africa. So that clearly shows the role that China is playing towards peace or contributing towards peace in Africa. So we are seeing China playing a major role in supporting the initiatives by the AU and African countries.
The visit by the young African officers is one sign of China's growing ties with Africa, not only in trade and investment, but also in peace and security, which is critical for the continent's development.
At the end of this seminar, we are going to learn more in terms of China-Africa partnership and what are the policies in terms of China-Africa partnership.
Security is an important chapter of the China-Africa story, and maintaining peace and security has become a pillar of the African Union. African officers from 45 countries currently visiting China is a true manifest of China's growing role in managing peace and security challenges on the African continent. The visit will also enable the African delegation make a further contribution to the China-Africa peace and security partnership. Beatrice Marshall, CGTN, Beijing, China.
Preparations continue for the Qingdao Fleet Review to mark the 70th anniversary of the founding of the People's Liberation Army Navy. As CGTN correspondent Han Bin reports, the multinational event will not only showcase the PLA Navy's latest achievements in a challenging environment, but is also a platform for naval diplomacy.
When India's missile destroyer Calcutta arrived at Qingdao, it signaled normalized ties between the two navies. Relations had been strained over territorial disputes and India's concerns with China's growing maritime power. The two sides resumed talks relating to maritime security last year.
And working on common goals is a very important issue for us, and being here at Qingdao is a statement to that effect.
The participation of a Japanese warship also indicates a breakthrough in relations, though many uncertainties remain. Western maritime powers have decided not to take part. The U.S. decision comes amid rising trade tensions with China. The U.S. does not have any claims in the South China Sea, yet it has frequently challenged China's claims there with so-called freedom of navigation operations. And it has criticized China's moves in those waters. Beijing is using the 70th anniversary to reach out to its counterparts across the globe.
Did I say that right?
The Chinese Navy stresses that its build-up is not a threat to anyone, but a safeguard for peace. One aim of the activities in Qingdao is trust building among the participants. China is presenting some of its best naval vessels for the fleet review, like the Type 052D destroyer Guiyang, which entered into service early this year.
Through exchange activities, we display the disciplined image of the Chinese Navy and establish its role as a messenger of peace.
Peace can be maintained with foreign armies through exchanges and cooperation.
The 21st century naval diplomacy takes the form of increased joint exercises at home and abroad, expanded visits further offshore, and the now decade-long commitment to the escort missions off the coast of Somalia.
Inviting in and going out, which has been used to describe China's foreign trade, can apply to the Navy in its relations with its foreign counterparts. But to change the skepticism in some quarters over its fast growth, the Navy needs to do more to take concrete measures and show its commitment. Han Bin, CGTN, Qingdao.
And in today's special series, Red Star Blue Water, we focus on the Naval Air Force. CGTN correspondent Han Bin was given rare access to a regiment in the eastern Chinese port of Qingdao, which will take part in the 70th anniversary parade. He spoke with pilots and technicians during rehearsals and got a first-hand look at how this new branch is transforming the Navy.
Before the pilot enters the cockpit, the ground crew have to finish their job.
我们做的这个工作啊，就是平常的直升机的维护和保养，把好每个细节关。如果我们出现啊，哪怕一个螺钉脱落，或者是管路连接有泄漏的话，可能对飞机的整个操纵啊，还有起落都会有很大的危险的，属于一个幕后的工作。大家平时看到的就是飞行员在天上驾着飞机啊，起飞翱翔。 但是在背后啊，都是离不开我们的默默付出的。
It's been 10 years since Lin Binbin was assigned to this regiment. He says he has a special feeling towards the aircraft.
在我看来，我们这个直升机，更像是一把利剑，为舰艇的指挥啊，进行准确的引导打击。
Flight officer Liu Peng and his team are preparing for the big parade. What is not combat? It's not without danger.
优秀的飞行员，第一是身体素质，这是最基本；心理素质。编队啊是看的一个整体的效果，整体的一个通过的效果。一架飞机飞好了，不代表你这个整体的能力。这个是要求每一架飞机，然后这个要稳定，然后看好你的掌机，标好你的掌机啊，之后尽量的保持稳定。
Liu Peng has been flying Z9 helicopters since 2005. He can see the rising role of naval aviation through increasingly diversified missions. The Z9 is one of China's latest indigenous aircraft with advanced attack capabilities. The Navy has accelerated its modernization as required for offensive and defensive operations.
主要的视线是看好你的掌机，盯好你的掌机，然后通过你的副驾驶，通过你的战术指挥长来给你报一些数据啊，距离啊，这个高度啊，这个速度。
With the Navy going blue and the expansion of the carrier fleets, its air weaponry is also progressing.
在飞机上的话，我们这一款飞机的话，就更像是空中的一个轻骑兵，非常的机动，非常的灵活。海军航空兵的话，它主要是执行的一些海上的任务，随着舰艇到海上去巡逻呀，侦察呀、护航呀。随着军队的转型发展，现在的训练的强度、训练的难度比以往要大大的加强。特别是我这个新飞行员分到我们单位之后，他的成长的周期大大的缩短。随着我们的海军不断的走向远洋。我们的舰艇，现在吨位越来越大，它都可以携带我们这款直升机去执行一些任务。所以说我们与其他的兵种的配合会越来越多。
Historically, Chinese naval aviation has been land-based. Now it covers maritime patrol, anti-submarine operations, and logistical support. The aircraft carrier program and the escort missions have expanded its new dimension to missions further offshore.
Participating in the anniversary parade is another sign this new branch is taking center stage in the Navy.
虽然我们不能去现场吧，去接受检阅，但是我们的飞机啊能够正常的飞过去，安全平安的，这就是给我们最大的鼓励。
作为海军航空兵，一名普通的飞行员，能参加这次70周年的海上阅兵活动，感觉到非常的荣幸，因为我们要在全国人民面前、全世界人民面前展现我们海军航空兵的一个风采。
If the sky is the limit, the Navy's Air Force is determined to challenge it. Han Bin, CGTN, Qingdao.
In the next episode of our special series, Red Star Blue Water, we look at China's shipbuilding capacity. China has been building ships more rapidly than many other naval powers. We visit a leading shipbuilder for an inside look at the industry. Be sure to join us.
造船这一块体现出来的是综合的水平。中国能够有很多的类似的这种舰船下海，那折射出来的是整个中国的这个工业体系、工业制造的水平在逐步的提升。
From refitting and import to manufacturing and export, China's shipbuilding industry has surged.
Arab League foreign ministers met in Cairo on Sunday for an urgent session to discuss the so-called deal of the century due to be announced by the U.S. in May. The deal is expected to outline the way forward in the Israel-Palestine relations. CGTN's Yasser Hakim has the details. Let's take a look.
The Arab League foreign ministers have voiced their concerns to the proposed Middle East peace plan being set forth by the U.S. The details of the deal have not been released yet, but leaked information have not been well received by the Arab nations.
What benefit is the deal of the century after the US had recognized Jerusalem as the capital of Israel and have taken over Arab land occupied in 1948? What is left for us to be satisfied with in any deal? The US and Israel have killed the Palestinian refugees file. They have taken Jerusalem. They have occupied our land. There is nothing they can offer us anymore.
According to international law and UN resolutions, Palestinians are due an independent state with East Jerusalem as its capital. Palestinian refugees, driven from their homes after 1948 to give way for an Israeli state, should also return to their homeland. The absence of such clauses prompted the Arab foreign ministers to issue a collective condemnation of the US peace plan.
We confirm that the Arab nations have submitted the Arab Peace Plan of 2002, which is based on international law and land for peace. These countries refuse any deal or plan that doesn't adhere to international law. The deal of the century will not succeed in creating permanent and comprehensive peace in the Middle East unless it approves the legal rights of the Palestinians to have the independent state according to the June 1967 borders, with East Jerusalem as its capital and the right of the return for the refugees.
The meeting was adjourned without setting a date for the next session. The statements from the Cairo meetings reflect a preliminary reaction to the deal of the century, but the final stance will be more apparent once the details of the deal are announced. Yas Hakim for CGTN, Cairo.
Let's take a look at some of the top stories making headlines this hour in Sri Lanka, where the government has ordered a new nighttime curfew in the capital, Colombo. The measures come after a series of deadly bombings hit the South Asian island nation on Easter Sunday. The coordinated explosions tore through churches and luxury hotels. 290 people have been killed and hundreds others wounded. Sudan and the Transitional Military Council says it is considering the formation of a military-civilian council. But Sudanese protest leaders claim the military council is reluctant about handing over power to civilians. The leaders on Sunday suspended negotiations with the Transitional Council. More protests are expected as part of a widening campaign to push for the transfer of power to civilians. And in Libya, explosions and air raids have shaken the capital Tripoli as rival forces battle for control. The two-week offensive led by the eastern-based Libya National Army has left more than 225 people dead and more than 1,000 wounded. And in China, preparations continue for the Qingdao Fleet Review to mark the 70th anniversary of the founding of the People's Liberation Army Navy. The multinational event will not only showcase the PLA Navy's latest achievements in a challenging environment, but is also a platform for naval diplomacy. And that is a wrap up of your top stories making headlines this hour. All right, time now for another short break. The news continues here on CGTN Africa Live. Here's a look at what's ahead, though. Questions around whether Jumia is an African startup arise after its listing on the New York Stock Exchange.
Africa is the nexus of enterprise, and global business will tell you why it matters.
From the mega investment projects to multi-billion-dollar mergers and acquisitions.
Africa today collects, just in terms of revenues for taxes alone, $545 billion a year. If you take 10% of that and you devote it to the energy sector, problem solved.
All this on Global Business, weekdays at this time on CGTN.
Africa Live. Find your voice.
Welcome back. South Africa's government has had to bring forward the bailout of state power firm Eskom. The state already rushed $355 million to the struggling utility earlier this month to avert a default, saying that more cash could be needed soon. The fact that the first tranche of the bailout had to be brought forward highlights the precariousness of Eskom's financial position, which has been exacerbated by the spiraling diesel and maintenance costs. The government in February promised Eskom a $1.6 billion a year bailout over the next 3 years, but it only expected to start giving the cash-strapped utility the first tranche of funds between August and October this year. But according to the Finance Ministry report to Parliament, by end of March, Eskom was experiencing difficulties raising funding, prompting Finance Minister Tito Mboweni to authorize the cash transfer on April the 2nd. Eskom supplies more than 90% of electricity in Africa's most advanced economy, but is grappling with cash flow problems and a debt mountain which it is struggling to service. The government in February promised Eskom a 23 billion rand a year bailout over the next 3 years, but it only expected to start giving the cash-strapped utility the first tranche of funds between August and October this year. Moving on, after its landmark achievement of becoming the first African tech startup to list on the New York Stock Exchange, Jumia has been answering some tough questions in Nigeria. There's an ongoing debate about whether or not the firm is an African startup. It arises from the fact that though it operates in Africa, Jumia has its headquarters and corporate base outside the continent. CGTN's Deji Batmas explains.
As Jumia continues to soak in the huge success of its listing on the New York Stock Exchange, it's having some explaining to do back home in Africa, especially Nigeria. Since the online retail firm listing as the first African tech startup on the New York Stock Exchange, many have been questioning if indeed Jumia is an African company. The tech firm was founded in Lagos, Nigeria, but it is incorporated in Germany, while its global headquarters is in Dubai and its technology center is in Portugal. The current key drivers of Jumia are French, who are co-founders of the company. These has prompted questions over whether indeed Jumia's feat could be celebrated as an achievement of an African startup. Not taking the issue lying low, the company assembled some of its top management staff in Lagos to address the subject.
Jumia operates in 14 African countries, and for you to operate, you have to be, legally registered in each country. So Jumia is an African company, which is why we use the term African. In terms of the ownership of the company, the largest investor in Jumia pre-listing is MTN, which is an African company.
Another big issue is why Jumia seemingly ignored the local bourse, the Nigerian stock market, in favor of the New York Stock Exchange. The company says it's basically for business reasons.
We spoke to a couple of investors when we were making this decision. And the second reason is that the NYSE is the largest stock exchange in the world. There are a lot of big technology players there, including Amazon, Google, and investors are quite familiar with the e-commerce business. So for these reasons, and the reasons include that also improves the perception of the company to allow us to acquire new customers, new vendors is the reasons why it was a logical reason to go to NYSE.
Jumia says it is not completely ruling out the possibility of a secondary listing in any of the 14 countries where it currently operates, if and when the need arises. So there is a chance for local investors here who may be willing to take a bite of the pie. But don't forget, Jumia is not making profit yet. In fact, it lost $47.6 million in 2017. But on the flip side, the revenue has continued to grow every passing year. So that shows an attraction for some shrewd investors. Deji Badmos, CGTN, Lagos, Nigeria.
Kenya Airways has resumed its flights to Khartoum following a temporary suspension occasioned by political upheaval in the country. The national carrier had canceled flights to Sudan after the closure of Khartoum International Airport by the Ministry of Defense shortly after the military announced that it had taken over the government. The ouster of Sudan's long-serving ruler, Omar al-Bashir, triggered uncertainty among Kenyan businesses with interest in the Northeast African nation. For several years, KQ Air flights have fueled a thriving trade and opened up Sudan for Kenya's tea, coffee, spices, as well as tobacco. Kenya Airways runs 5 weekly flights to the troubled country and is one of the major carriers operating this route. China's Financial Futures Exchange has for the 4th time relaxed restrictions on stock index futures trading. This is aimed at meeting investors' risk hedging needs and will help introduce more long-term capital into the market. With the details, here is CGTN's Lily Liu.
Another step closer to the normalization of Chinese index futures trading rules. The Chinese Financial Futures Exchange has for the 4th time relaxed restrictions on stock index futures trading, which was tightened in 2015 after some abnormal fluctuations in the market. The new rules took effect today. According to the guidelines, transaction fees for closing intraday positions will be further cut to 0.0345%, and that is still higher than the level before 2015, but much lower than the ultra-high of 0.23% that took effect in September 2015. The margin ratio for small-cap CSI 500 index futures is now lowered to 12%, closer to the 10% level that's considered normal. This is while the margin ratio for the other two major indices, CSI 300 and SSE 50, have earlier been reset to 10%. In addition, intraday activity exceeding 500 lots on a single contract would be considered excessive, as opposed to 50 lots previously. The relaxation would meet the demand for most short-term speculative operations. The China Financial Futures Exchange said the rule change is aimed at meeting investors' risk hedging needs. The regulator also said it will help introduce more long-term capital into the market. Back in 2015, Chinese stock market suffered an almost 50% crash in merely 2 months. Some blame the index futures trading for starting fire, as major players in the wind vane market first sold short the indices all in a sudden, triggering panic in the stock market. Chinese regulators then put extremely strict rules on index futures trading, which had since then lost vitality. Analysts say the normalization of the rules will help investors better manage risks, foster a more liquid derivatives market, and promote the healthy development of the Chinese financial market. Lulu, CGTN.
Shares of online scrapbook company Pinterest surged more than 28% on its first day of trading, valuing the firm at about $16 billion. Its performance after its debut on the stock market signals increased investor appetite for new tech listings. The offering of 75 million shares was priced at $19, above the expected range of $15 and $17, and raised $1.4 billion in net proceeds. The shares opened at $23.75 and touched a high of $24.89 per share. Pinterest, which is a social scrapbooking website that allows users to search for various topics, has said that its business is heavily dependent on advertisers. All right, time now for another short break, but when we return, glitz and glamour at the Cape Town Fashion Week as African designers showcase their talent.
The greatest journeys, the greatest sights. the greatest adventures.
Here in Qanater, this weir allows the locals to walk on water.
We're far more than just TV news. We're your passport to the wonders of Africa.
To bring you stories of struggle, survival and hope.
So let's explore. CGTN. See the difference.
Africa Live. Find your voice.
Welcome back to Egypt, where concerns over the rising rates of divorce has sparked a campaign to create awareness on the importance of marriage. The project, known as Mawada, meaning affection, is being undertaken by the Ministry of Solidarity. The initiative targets Cairo, Alexandria, and Port Said governorates, which allegedly have the highest divorce rates. CGTN's Yasser Hakim has the details.
According to CapMass, there are 250 divorces per day, making the rate of divorces in Egypt the highest in the world. The social effects of broken marriages have been a major concern for officials.
If the family is disintegrated, then the whole society will fall apart, so it's essential to have strong families. We have so many broken marriages in courts, and the children are victims. Some will resort to drugs, others to extremism to escape the problems in the home. If we don't intervene, we'll end up with a mentally damaged new generation.
And more women are becoming skeptical about the marriage institution.
We have
lost the affection and love between us in the midst of the economic and social challenges. Marriages are suffering the effects.
The problems are so many. Economic, people interfering in your lives, impatience to each other's issues, a lot of problems. All this makes the young girls reluctant to get married.
The government is planning to launch the Mawadda or affection campaign to teach youth and newlyweds the importance of cherishing marriage.
We train the youth in how to face difficulties of marriages together. For example, the economic challenges, how to raise mentally and physically healthy child, the hormonal changes in the women, how to face the problems in marriages without the need for divorce. Any marriage will not be authorized until the couple receive the training certificate from Affection Campaign.
Authorities will be using different methods such as lectures in universities and schools, community meetings, special YouTube and TV channels, media campaign, and civil society work. The family is the core base of any society, and the government here is hoping that it can retain the sacred position of the family in the Egyptian society in the coming few years. Yes, Hakim for CGTN, Cairo.
The world is commemorating Earth Day, but there's no good news coming out of some regions. Madagascar's delicate environmental ecosystem is diminishing by the day. Lemurs only exist naturally on the island of Madagascar, but if poaching and deforestation continues at the current rate, they may not exist at all. Let's take a look.
Although Madagascar is the only home to the lemur, the unique primate is being hunted by poachers, being deprived of the only home it has in the world.
Back then, we didn't know that it was bad to cut the wood, and you are earning 18,000 ariary or €4.50 a day. That's a lot of money. You could buy about 40 kilos of rice with that much.
These local poachers threaten Madagascar's 9 million hectares of forests, which are shrinking each year by 50,000 and 100,000 hectares, further inflicted by the simple need by the public to cook using wood.
They come and put wedges underneath, and then with their knife they remove the bark, and like that all the way along. They actually clean the wood. Take a look at this one. It's ebony. The guys from the town of Tamatave who buy the wood from these poachers, they are buying it at 1,000 ariary apiece. Ebony or non-ebony, it gets sold 1,000 ariary, just like that.
The poachers cut down the trees surrounding the nests, which provide the lemurs with a means of flight. Out of 111 recorded lemur species, 105 face the threat of extinction, according to the Lemur Conservation Network.
They cut down all the trees, leaving only one in the middle. Then the lemur is trapped and has nowhere to go. The traffickers then shake the tree with the lemur in it, so it falls down and gets caught.
The battle to save the lemurs has soured the relationship between authorities and activists, creating fertile environment for the poachers' threat to inhabit the wild in the island of lemurs. Beryl Oro, CGTN.
South African audiences were recently treated to mind-blowing collections from fashion designers on the continent. Emerging labels from several countries, including Ghana, Nigeria, Tanzania, and South Africa, showed off their newest lines at the Cape Town Fashion Week.
A journey back home, I Am Africa was the theme for this year's Africa Fashion International Cape Town show. It was a bold and daring display of exquisite collections from across Africa.
We felt the need to accurately depict our lives in Nigeria and accurately depict our influences. So we don't necessarily feel the need to go the route of colors or anything like that, because we're super curious of like light, and just the absence of color gives us more to work with.
What the world needs to realize as well, that the fashion that comes out of Africa can be global, is global. We don't have prints, like, you know, when you think of African fashion, first thing you think of is African prints. We don't have that. We're breaking that barrier as well.
Apia Saki is well known in international circles. Her designs recently caught the eye of music star Janet Jackson. Saki's new line was inspired by the inhumanity African people endured over many centuries.
The latest collection is called Till I Rise. So it's 400 years after ancestors were taken into slavery, when they passed through the gate of no return, never to return again. So this collection is to inspire the generations that no matter what we've been through, we will still rise.
African designers have come a long way over the last decade and are certainly making their mark on the catwalk.
We're no longer just the designers who are just, you know, decorating the runways, but we can really walk on the international stage and show what we do. Globally, we're being accepted. They are now coming to see us at our home in Africa.
The African fashion scene is changing. Younger, vibrant designers are quelling a hunger for garments that are unique. And there's a shift from bigger labels to more trendy and expensive pieces. Judy Shara, CGTN, Cape Town, South Africa.
Well, we've got your sports news coming up after the break. Here's a sneak peek at the headline.